Silent CEO saw her collapse after work and refused to walk away. The digital clock above the marble reception desk flipped silently to 11:45. Beyond the towering exterior glass walls, Chicago's first winter snow fell heavily. Violent white flakes crashed against the glass of Vance Corporation headquarters, contrasting the silent warmth inside. The private elevator chimed through the empty lobby. Liam Vance stepped out. His tailored charcoal suit was immaculate, his posture rigidly straight. As chief executive officer, Liam was notoriously cold, never wasting breath on small talk. He controlled his massive empire through ruthlessly brief emails and surgical decisions that no executive dared to question. His mind was consumed by crucial quarterly financial projections. "Have the car waiting," Liam instructed his head of security through his earpiece, his voice a flat, uncompromising monotone. "I am leaving now." As he strode toward the revolving doors, a faint, erratic sound broke his concentration. Near the exit, Nora Reed stumbled. The young interior design intern was severely exhausted after a long, brutal shift. Her heavy canvas bag, overstuffed with heavy architectural sketches and blueprint rolls, slipped dangerously down her shoulder. Her face was completely devoid of color, her breathing shallow and desperately uneven. "Just a few more steps," Nora whispered to herself, her voice trembling violently. "Just make it to the train." She pushed her frozen fingers against the freezing glass door, but her body had reached its absolute physical limit. Her vision suddenly blurred into absolute darkness. Her knees buckled beneath her. Before her fragile frame could violently strike the unforgiving marble floor, Liam moved. The purely instinctual reaction overrode his calculated demeanor. He immediately lunged forward, his strong arms catching her just in time. "Hey, look at me," Liam commanded sharply, bracing her weight against his chest. "Call a medic immediately," he shouted into his earpiece. As Nora slumped against him, something slipped from her frayed coat pocket. A small object fluttered down, landing silently at the tip of his polished leather shoe. Liam froze completely. The air vanished from his lungs. It was a pale blue origami flower. The meticulous folds were undeniably familiar. He was not stunned by the unconscious girl in his arms. He was utterly paralyzed because that specific, delicate paper flower was the exact same object that had saved him from a terrifying darkness 20 years ago. His dark eyes widened in absolute shock. "Impossible." Liam breathed softly into the deafening silence. "Is it you?" The harsh, blinding fluorescent lights of the corporate medical room hummed with a sterile, suffocating energy. The air smelled sharply of rubbing alcohol and clinical indifference. Nora lay entirely motionless on the narrow white examination bed, an IV line taped securely to her fragile, pale wrist. Standing near the door, the on-call physician reviewed a digital chart. His expression was strictly professional. "There is no critical trauma, Mr. Vance," the doctor reported in a hushed, even tone. "However, she is suffering from severe physical exhaustion. Her vitals indicate chronic sleep deprivation, alarming malnutrition, and prolonged, intense psychological stress." Liam did not look at the doctor. He sat completely still in the rigid plastic chair beside the bed. "I understood. Leave us," he commanded softly. The doctor nodded silently and exited, closing the heavy door with a definitive click. The deafening silence returned. Liam looked down. Resting perfectly in the center of his broad, powerful palm was the pale blue origami flower. The paper was worn, its creases softened by time and touch, but the meticulous folding technique was entirely unmistakable. The sterile white walls of the clinic start to fade away. He was suddenly pulled backward, drowning in a distant memory. He was 8 years old again. It was his birthday. The sprawling, immaculate Vance estate had been completely empty. No parents, no celebration. Just the cold, suffocating reality of immense wealth and absolute neglect. He had run away into the violent, unforgiving thunderstorm, wandering aimlessly until his expensive leather shoes were ruined and his small body was shivering uncontrollably. He had collapsed in a dilapidated, unfamiliar neighborhood. Through the blinding rain, a warm, worn hand had reached out. A woman with tired but incredibly kind eyes approached him. Her name was Martha. She had brought the freezing air of a billionaire empire into her cramped, leaking apartment. He vividly remembered the overwhelming smell of cheap, hot potato soup. It was the best meal he had ever eaten. Sitting across from him at the small, scratched wooden table was the kind woman's daughter, a little girl with bright, perceptive eyes. Seeing his lingering, silent fear of the storm raging outside, the little girl had carefully folded a piece of scrap paper. She slid it across the table. "This is a lucky flower," the young girl had said, her voice completely sincere. "If you keep it, you will not be afraid of the dark anymore. It protects you." Liam inhaled sharply, the sterile smell of the clinic violently pulling him back to the present. He looked at the unconscious woman lying on the bed. The exhaustion etched deep into her features was a cruel testament to a life of brutal, relentless survival. Was this broken, fiercely independent intern truly the same bright girl who had saved him from the freezing dark? He gently traced the edge of the paper flower. An indescribable, heavy knot formed in his chest. If it was her, a terrifying dilemma stood before him. The ruthless CEO in him demanded distance to maintain absolute control and strict professional boundaries. But the lost little boy inside his heart desperately wanted to repay an impossible, massive debt. "If it is really you," Liam whispered into the empty, silent room, his voice barely audible over the steady, rhythmic beep of the digital heart monitor. "What am I supposed to do now?" He closed his tired eyes, completely lost in the sudden weight of their shared and complicated history. Tomorrow would change absolutely everything. The air in the design department of Vance Corporation was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the frantic electricity of looming deadlines. Under the aggressive restructuring plan, the department had become a high-pressure crucible. From the soundproof sanctuary of his 50th floor office, Liam leaned back, the pale blue origami flower resting on his mahogany desk like a silent accusation. Ever since that fateful night, he had spent the last 3 days investigating every detail of her life. He knew about the mounting medical bills, the crumbling apartment in the suburbs, and the grueling double shifts she pulled to keep her mother, Martha, in treatment. "She hasn't left for 36 hours, Julian," his head of operations noted quietly over the intercom. "I have eyes, Julian," Liam replied, his voice a surgical blade. "I see the quality of the night shift catering is unacceptable. Change the vendor. I want fresh, nutritious meals delivered every night at midnight, not just for the interns, but for the entire floor. And increase the overtime stipend by 20%, effective immediately." Soon, premium hot meals replaced cold vending machine snacks. And somehow, the ambiguity surrounding the girl's identity still lingered in his mind, but these seemingly insignificant actions started happening more and more often. But inside the hyper-competitive design department, this sudden generosity bred intense suspicion. Within days, the toxic whispers began. They slithered through the break room and echoed in the restrooms. "Must be nice to be the CEO's project." A senior designer sneered near the espresso machine, loud enough for Nora to hear. "I heard she's using the Starving Artist Act to skip the line for the permanent associate position." Nora's fingers tightened around her charcoal pencil, but she didn't look up. The whispers followed her into the elevators and echoed in the break room. They called her the charity case and the glass house girl. Every time a high-quality meal appeared or a bonus hit their accounts, the resentment toward her curdled. One evening, as Nora gathered her sketches, she heard a group of interns laughing in the hallway. "If I knew all it took was a well-timed feint in the lobby, I'd have collapsed months ago," one girl giggled. Nora stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't cry. She couldn't afford the luxury of tears. She closed her eyes and saw her mother's pale face, the gentle way Martha folded paper flowers even when her hands shook. Be a pillar, Nora, she told herself. A pillar doesn't break because of the wind. But tensions started to escalate and reached a breaking point when Liam, sensing the toxicity from his ivory tower, decided to exert his authority. He sent a company-wide email that landed with the weight of a gavel. Subject: Professional conduct and merit-based culture. At this firm, merit is the only currency. Not background, not rumors, and certainly not the whispers behind backs. Any employee found contributing to a hostile work environment or engaging in character defamation will be terminated without further warning. We value results. Everything else is noise. She stood at her desk, staring at the screen, feeling the invisible weight of Liam's gaze from 50 floors up. The safety he offered felt more like a sentence. She wasn't a partner. She was a specimen under a microscope. And the dictator was only just beginning to realize that power could save a life, but it couldn't mend a broken spirit. 2 days later, it was a bitterly cold afternoon, with light winter snow falling softly on the busy streets outside, dusting the unforgiving city pavement in pure white. Liam walked aimlessly through the dense Chicago crowd. He let the deafening, chaotic noise wash over him. He desperately needed the blaring taxi horns and the overlapping conversations of hurried strangers to drown out his crushing, chronic exhaustion. Then, he paused at a busy intersection corner, glancing silently through the wet glass of a cheap, run-down diner. Under the flickering, warm yellow light of a hanging bulb, he finally saw her. Nora sat completely alone in a worn vinyl booth. She looked remarkably fragile, yet entirely peaceful. A bowl of cheap, watery broth sat untouched before her. Spread across the cracked laminate table were scattered blueprints and pale blue paper squares. His chest tightened. Before his rational mind intervened, Liam pushed open the heavy glass door. The brass bell chimed. He walked straight toward her booth. "May I?" Liam asked gently, his deep voice cutting through the ambient diner noise. Nora flinched violently, her tired eyes darting upward. She saw the powerful man whose mere shadow was actively destroying her reputation at the office. She quickly scanned the noisy diner. Every single booth was packed tightly with shivering commuters. She desperately wanted him to walk away, but he was the chief executive officer of Vance Corporation. The massive power dynamic completely suffocated her instinct to resist. She gave a small, defeated nod. Liam sat down heavily on the creaking vinyl. He raised his hand, his authoritative aura instantly silencing the nearby chatter. "Waiter, bring me exactly what she is having," he commanded. Nora shifted uncomfortably, pulling her heavy blueprints closer to her chest. She instinctively built a physical barricade between them. Every time this intimidating man intervened in her life, the toxic office whispers grew louder. He was a harbinger of absolute professional ruin disguised as a savior. She stared down at the blue paper. Her bruised fingers resumed their precise folding. Liam watched her in silence. His gaze fell upon a glass jar near the edge of the table. It was half filled with delicately folded paper flowers. "Beautiful flowers," Liam noted quietly, his commanding tone completely absent. "What do you fold them for?" Nora did not stop moving her hands. Her voice was carefully constructed to offer nothing. "My mother says each flower is a prayer," Nora murmured, eyes fixed on the paper. "I do not have much to give her, so I fold these small things." Liam leaned forward slightly. The immense corporate armor he wore every day cracked just a fraction. "The person who taught you must be very gentle," Liam said softly. A painful truth echoed behind his ribs. He remembered that gentle voice from 20 years ago, the smell of hot soup in a freezing storm. "She is," Nora replied, genuine warmth finally breaking through her cold facade. "Her name is Martha. She told me once that if you fold 1,000 paper flowers for someone, you get one wish. I just want my mother to get well." The name hit him like a physical blow. Martha. Liam froze. The clattering noise of the diner faded into absolute silence. It was her. The definitive proof sat right across from him. He opened his mouth. He needed to bridge the massive gap between them and confess who he truly was. And before he could form a single word, Nora abruptly stood up. She hastily shoved her blueprints and the glass jar into her bag. "Excuse me, Mr. Vance," Nora said abruptly, returning to strict professionalism. "My visiting hours at the hospital start in 10 minutes. I have to go." She did not wait for a response, pulling her thin coat tight and rushing out into the freezing snow. Liam sat completely alone. The waiter placed a steaming bowl of broth in front of him. Liam stared through the frosted window, watching her small figure disappear into the violent storm. And for the very first time in his carefully calculated life, the untouchable CEO realized a truly terrifying truth. He did not want to control her reality. He desperately wanted to finally understand it. Ever since the diner, Liam's focus fractured. His corner office felt impossibly hollow. He found himself staring at the empty drafting table 50 floors below. One day passed. Then two. By the third morning, the silence became unbearable. The meticulously controlled CEO broke his own protocol. He bypassed his assistants and directly called human resources. "Where is the intern, Nora Reed?" Liam demanded, his voice tight. The line hesitated. "She took emergency leave, Mr. Vance. Her mother's condition deteriorated rapidly." Liam dropped the phone. He did not ask for a scheduled reshuffle. He did not check the stock ticker. "Find out which hospital." He instructed his security detail sharply. "Now." Meanwhile, miles away, Nora sat completely alone in the freezing hallway of St. Jude Medical Center. She did not cry. She was entirely out of tears. At her feet lay a scattered pile of medical bills, the printed numbers representing a debt she could never repay in a single lifetime. She stared at the scuffed linoleum floor, her body running on pure, agonizing adrenaline. Seeking any distraction from the terrifying beep of the intensive care monitors, she pulled out her phone. Then, her thumb numbly opened her corporate email. An anonymous address had forwarded a leaked human resources document. Subject: Finalized intern terminations. Nora's breath hitched. Her bruised fingers scrolled down the brightly glowing screen. It was a scanned termination list. At the very bottom of the page, a bold, black signature finalized the brutal corporate restructuring. It was Liam Vance's unmistakable, elegant handwriting. Directly above his signature, a single name struck her like a physical blow. N. Reed. Contract denied. Nora stopped breathing. The sterile air in her lungs turned to sharp glass. All the crushing overtime, the brutal night shifts, the desperate attempts to prove she was more than just a pathetic charity case, it all dissolved into nothing. She had convinced herself that Liam Vance was different. She had thought his quiet interventions meant he actually saw her worth. But the ruthless machine of Vance Corporation had crushed her anyway, effectively sealing her mother's fate. She slowly locked the screen. The absolute darkness of the hallway finally swallowed her. Then, the heavy elevator doors at the end of the corridor opened with a soft chime. Liam stepped out. His expensive overcoat was unbuttoned, his breathing unusually heavy. He had abandoned a massive board meeting just to find her. He saw her sitting in the dim light. She looked entirely broken, crushed beneath an invisible, insurmountable weight. He took a slow, hesitant step forward. He wanted to bridge the impossible distance. He wanted to pull her out of the suffocating dark, just as she had done for him 20 years ago in a freezing rainstorm. Then, Nora slowly lifted her head. She looked at the billionaire standing in the sterile hospital hallway. The tentative gratitude she had felt in the diner completely vanished. It was instantly replaced by a deep, agonizing resentment. The immense class divide between them had never felt so violently real. She slowly stood up. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was terrifyingly flat. "You did not need to come here," Nora stated softly. Liam stopped walking immediately. He frowned in deep confusion, reading the absolute, hollow devastation in her dark, tired eyes. "Nora, I just heard the news about your mother. I wanted to help." "You already said everything," Nora interrupted. Her voice cracked, bleeding with raw, unfiltered exhaustion. She gripped her phone tightly. "You said it all perfectly." Liam froze in place. He stared at her pale face, completely uncomprehending the sudden venomous shift in her fragile demeanor. Nora looked away, her posture rigidly defensive. She built an impenetrable wall between them. She was drowning, and the man standing before her was the one who had just cut her lifeline. Liam did not take another step. He did not try to defend himself. The legendary, articulate CEO stood entirely speechless. Looking at her shattered expression, Liam understood a brutal truth. Whatever he said right now would just be noise. Martha's recovery room. Pale morning sunlight filtered through the thin hospital blinds. The rhythmic beep of the digital heart monitor was steady, offering a stark contrast to the terrifying chaos of the previous night. Martha slowly opened her heavy eyes, gradually adjusting to the dim, sterile hospital light. The grueling surgery had been a complete medical success. Outside the thick, soundproof glass door, Liam stood completely frozen. He was a billionaire. He commanded international boardrooms with a single glance. Yet, looking through that clear pane of glass, he reverted entirely to the terrified 8-year-old boy shivering in a violent Chicago thunderstorm. A crushing guilt paralyzed his limbs. He had achieved everything, but he had abandoned the only people who had ever shown him unconditional warmth. He did not dare turn the cold metal handle. He nervously rubbed his right thumb against his index finger, a deeply ingrained childhood tic. From the rigid hospital bed, Martha turned her head weakly, her cloudy vision slowly focused on the tall figure standing in the empty corridor. She watched the repetitive, anxious movement of his hands. A sudden spark of recognition broke through her medicated haze. "Nora," Martha whispered, her voice frail and dry. Nora immediately leaned over the metal bed rail, holding her mother's hand. "I am right here, Mom. You are completely safe now." Martha slowly lifted a trembling finger, pointing directly toward the heavy glass door. "Nora. Those eyes. That nervous habit. I remember him. The little boy got lost in the rain." Nora frowned in deep confusion, turning her head to look at the powerful CEO standing outside. "Mom, you are confused. That is Liam Vance. He is my boss." "No," Martha breathed softly, a weak, nostalgic smile touching her pale lips. "That is the little boy." Nora froze entirely.
I'm right here with you.
The breathable air in the sterile room
Everything is going
vanished.
to be okay.
Her exhausted mind raced violently back to the pale blue origami flower. The sudden, invasive interest in her daily life. The expensive corporate meals mysteriously arrive at her desk. It all clicked together with a sickening, devastating clarity. She slowly walked toward the door, pulling the heavy door firmly shut behind her to protect her mother from the fallout. Liam looked at her. The impenetrable armor of the corporate dictator was completely gone. He looked profoundly exhausted, entirely exposed, and deeply remorseful. Nora did not melt into his arms. The shocking revelation did not magically erase the brutal termination list burned into her exhausted retinas. "So it was just a pity," Nora stated softly. Her voice was pure ice. "A few hot meals to clear your guilty conscience before your ruthless corporation discarded me." Liam flinched visibly. He instantly recognized the raw, jagged edge of a severe misunderstanding. The leaked human resources list. She truly thought he had fired her. He desperately wanted to explain the clerical error. He wanted to scream that he would never let her fall. But looking through the glass at Martha's fragile, sleeping state, he violently forced his protective instincts down. This was a critical recovery ward, not a hostile boardroom. "I owe you and your mother a life," Liam said quietly, his deep voice thick with heavily suppressed emotion. "But I am also the head of the place that made you collapse. I accept that." Nora crossed her arms tightly across her chest. The immense fatigue in her bones morphed into an unbreakable, fiercely defensive pride. She would not be his charity case. Gratitude does not give you the right to step into my life and rearrange everything, Nora replied bitterly. You paid the medical bill. Your debt is settled. Now, leave. She turned her back completely, and Liam slowly lowered his hand. He took a deliberate, heavy step back into the empty corridor. 1 week later, Martha was finally discharged. Inside their cramped suburban apartment, the familiar lingering scent of old wood mixed with warm broth. Martha had insisted on inviting Liam to dinner to reminisce about everything. Nora had reluctantly agreed. She moved through the small kitchen with a stiff, resigned posture. She fully believed she was just serving out her final, agonizing notice period at Vance Corporation before officially clearing out her desk at the end of the month. Liam stood awkwardly near the chipped laminate counter. The formidable billionaire looked entirely out of place in the tiny space, yet he quietly rolled up the sleeves of his expensive tailored shirt. He clumsily washed the cheap vegetables under the sputtering faucet and carefully carried the chipped ceramic bowls to the small wooden dining table. Martha stood by the stove, stirring a familiar, steaming pot. Finally they sat down. Liam stared down at the bowl in front of him. Still the exact same cheap, thick potato soup from 2 decades ago. He picked up his metal spoon. He took a slow, deliberate bite. The soup, Liam whispered, his voice incredibly thick with emotion. It is still just as good as it was back then. Martha smiled warmly across the table. Her kind eyes were glassy with unshed tears as she looked at the powerful billionaire sitting in her cramped kitchen. You were so incredibly small, Martha began softly, her voice breaking the heavy silence. Nora stopped eating, her eyes shifting quietly between her mother and Liam. I still remember opening the apartment door that night, Martha continued, her gaze distant as the memory flooded back. The rain was coming down in absolute sheets. You were standing there wearing this ridiculous, expensive little suit, completely soaked through. Your leather shoes were ruined, but you did not cry. Liam froze. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the cheap metal spoon. Most children would have been screaming for their parents, Martha said, her voice gentle but piercing. But you just stood there on the doormat. She smiled softly, then reached across the table, her worn hand resting lightly near his. And I am glad you finally found your way out of the rain. Liam did not say a word. The ruthless CEO, the man who controlled thousands of lives with a single email, simply closed his eyes and let out a long, trembling breath, finally allowing the terrified 8-year-old boy inside him to rest. After the quiet meal, Martha politely excused herself to rest in the bedroom. The heavy silence instantly returned. Nora sat across from Liam. She forced her tired spine perfectly straight, building her defensive walls back up. Thank you for coming, Nora stated, her tone strictly professional, devoid of any warmth. I will be quietly clearing out my desk this coming Friday. You do not have to worry about any awkward encounters at the office. Liam did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal suit vest. He withdrew a crisp, folded document and slowly slid it across the scratched wooden table. Nora looked down. It was an official Vance Corporation employment contract. A brilliant red corporate seal sat boldly at the bottom, signifying a permanent, senior-track associate position. She frowned, her pulse suddenly accelerating. The person on the termination list you saw that day was Nora Reed, Liam explained quietly. She was an intern in the marketing department. You were simply too exhausted to read the last name carefully, Nora. Nora froze. Her dark eyes widened in absolute shock. Her trembling fingers hovered over the thick paper. But, Nora stammered, her voice breaking, the design department had severe budget cuts. They laid off 3 people. Liam leaned forward. The cold, intimidating CEO was completely gone. His dark eyes held nothing but profound, genuine respect. Yes, they did, Liam said, his deep voice incredibly gentle. But you were never on that termination list. You were hired because you are the hardest worker in this entire building. You redrew dozens of complex architectural sketches without complaint. You survived the brutal pressure and consistently stayed at your desk until 2 in the morning. Nora stared at the red seal. Her defensive armor violently cracked. This permanent contract was drafted and signed 3 days before I ever knew who you actually were. Liam continued relentlessly, stripping away her remaining doubts. Your own relentless effort saved your career. Not my pity, not my favoritism. The agonizing, heavy resentment that had poisoned her heart for weeks instantly evaporated. The suffocating weight of her desperate survival finally lifted. For the first time in months, tears spilled hot and fast down her pale cheeks. I thought. Nora choked out, burying her face in her trembling hands. I thought I had lost absolutely everything. Liam did not reach out to touch her. He just sat there in the quiet kitchen, offering her the completely safe, silent space to finally breathe. 1 year later, Chicago. The first winter snow returned today, gently blanketing the unforgiving busy city streets in a familiar, quiet layer of pure, freezing white. Inside an elegant, minimalist art gallery downtown, the atmosphere was exceptionally warm and wonderfully vibrant. Nora Reed stood near the center of the brilliantly lit room. She was no longer the exhausted, collapsing intern desperate for survival. She was now a senior architectural designer at Vance Corporation. By sheer, undeniable professional competence, she had permanently silenced every single toxic whisper and completely shattered all the baseless rumors of corporate favoritism. Her highly anticipated solo exhibition displayed intricate, breathtaking architectural models crafted entirely from recycled corporate blueprints and delicate origami flowers. Sitting comfortably in the very front row, Martha smiled brightly. The deep exhaustion that once shadowed the older woman's face was completely gone, permanently replaced by a remarkably healthy, vibrant glow. Near the back of the crowded gallery, standing quietly in the dim shadows, was Liam. He wore a simple, unbuttoned charcoal coat. There was no heavy security detail. There were no flashing press cameras. He was not there as the ruthless chief executive officer inspecting a highly valuable corporate asset. He was simply a man, silently admiring the truly remarkable achievements of the brilliant woman he deeply respected and loved. The crowd eventually thinned. Nora noticed him. She did not hesitate. She did not lower her gaze in nervous submission. She walked directly toward him, her footsteps incredibly confident and perfectly measured against the polished hardwood floor. She stood before him as an absolute equal, proudly radiating a quiet, fiercely earned pride. Liam looked down at the small, pale blue origami flower resting gently in the palm of his hand. It was a completely new one, freshly folded from a discarded architectural sketch. 20 years ago, a fragile paper flower saved a terrified, lost child, Liam said. His deep voice was incredibly soft, reserved only for her. 1 year ago, it unexpectedly woke up a man who was completely blinded by his own immense power. Nora slowly stepped closer. She reached up, her steady fingers confidently and deliberately adjusting the sharp collar of his expensive dark coat. "And what about right now, Liam?" Nora asked softly, a genuine, uniquely challenging spark beautifully illuminating her dark, expressive eyes. Liam did not look away. He looked directly into her eyes, a rare, entirely unguarded smile finally breaking across his normally stoic, calculating face. "Right now," Liam replied, "it is a permanent reminder that I do not actually need a savior. I just deeply need a true, formidable partner. Someone willingly walks alongside me through every single bitter winter blizzard." Nora smiled back, her defensive walls permanently dismantled. "The asking price for this specific partner is incredibly high right now, Mr. Vance. Vance Corporation can easily afford it," Liam answered quickly, without a single second of hesitation. "I am happily paying with the rest of my entire life." Then, without needing to say another word, they turned away from the bright lights and the lingering applause. Side by side, they walked toward the heavy glass doors, together into the dark, chaotic city, quietly disappearing with the beautiful, silent white of the season's first snow. Love is rarely about rescue. It is about profound respect. Liam and Nora's story reminds us that a person's greatest gift isn't stepping in to save someone, but trusting them enough to let them fight their own battles. We often mistake protection for love, using our resources to shield those we care about. But true connection cannot thrive in the shadow of a savior complex or an unequal power dynamic. It requires the raw courage to step back and allow someone to build their own unyielding pride. Finally, mature love doesn't demand a debt of gratitude or a fairy tale ending. It is about two independent people choosing to stand side by side in the freezing snow, as absolute equals, proving that the strongest bonds are formed when no one has to look down.